Dawn had barely touched the manor when the courtyard filled with trembling bodies. The air was cold enough to sting, yet buckets of steaming brine waited beside a long wooden table, waiting for hands that would soon burn inside them. The servants were herded forward, their breath turning to mist as the overseer paced before them with a rod carved from bone. Above, the noble family watched from their balcony, sipping wine as though preparing for a performance rather than a punishment. Elara stood among the servants, her fingers already numb with fear. She had spilled a drop of ink on the lady's ledger, nothing more, nothing less. But here, mistakes weren't corrected, they were carved out.
The Lord stepped forward, voice smooth and ceremonial. "A servant who soils the household," he announced, "must cleanse themselves." 2 guards seized Elara's wrists and plunged her hands into the scalding brine. Her skin reddened instantly, the heat biting deep. A blade was placed in her shaking palm. She understood the command without hearing it spoken. The nobles leaned closer. The servants looked away. Elara lifted the blade to her own flesh. In this house, obedience wasn't taught. It was peeled slowly, painfully, until nothing human remained beneath it.
The Thornwall estate rose from the hills like a monument carved from arrogance itself, tall, ornate, and built on the backs of servants who walked its corridors like ghosts inside its walls. Nobility did not simply rule, they defined morality. Every rule, every expectation, every whisper of discipline flowed from their belief that the upper class embodied purity, while the lower class existed to preserve it. Servants were not seen as people. They were reflections, living mirrors meant to project the perfection of the house they served. If a servant faltered, it was said the household spirit faltered with them. This philosophy hardened into what the aristocracy called the doctrine of purity. Its teachings insisted that a noble's reputation must remain unblemished, and therefore, every mistake made by a servant was a stain that needed to be removed at the source, the servant's flesh. A broken plate was not clumsiness, it was impurity of hands. A spilled drink was moral leakage. A raised voice was spiritual disorder. Each flaw required correction, and corrections grew harsher with each generation. The origins of the skin-peeling ritual were traced to a single woman, Lady Marianne of Thornwall, a noble whose beauty was famous and whose cruelty was legendary. She believed that dirt lives in the skin, and that obedience must be proven through pain. When a maid once dropped her perfume bottle, Lady Marianne forced her to scrape the skin from her palm. With a fruit knife as the household watched, the maid fainted halfway through. Lady Marianne called it a promising start. From that moment, the ritual spread like wildfire. Other noble houses adopted it, disguising sadism beneath language of purity and discipline. Manuals circulated quietly through aristocratic circles, detailing the proper tools: a thin blade for precision, a brine bath to loosen the skin, a wooden table to steady trembling hands. Some houses added their own embellishments, recitations, kneeling, or the presence of guests to witness the cleansing. What began as punishment became performance. By the time Elara arrived at Thornwall, the ritual had become a tradition as entrenched as feasts or harvest festivals. She did not enter the manor as a servant by choice. Her family once lived comfortably, respected as healers in a small northern village. But the war took everything home: parents, livelihood, leaving Elara with nothing except the knowledge of herbs and a will to survive. Thornwall was the only place offering work, and even that came with chains disguised as wages. At first, Elara kept to herself. She was quiet, careful, and skilled in tasks that required precision. Her voice held a calm steadiness that unsettled the overseers. Her education set her apart. Even other servants whispered that she did not belong to this life. But in Thornwall, talent was never admired. It was feared. Noble families despised servants who carried dignity. Dignity resisted obedience. The incident that sealed her fate was painfully small. A drop of ink smeared across Lady Marianne's ledger. Elara had been updating the household inventory when the candle flickered and her hand slipped. The blot was no larger than a coin, yet the lady's face hardened as though witnessing treason. "This ledger holds the fate of my house," she snapped. "Your skin holds the dirt that stained it." The words were ritualistic, rehearsed, meaning the punishment was not about the ink. It was about reminding the servants that their bodies were possessions, subject to the whims of the elite. The doctrine of purity stated that impurity must be cleansed through the hands that caused it. And so Elara's hands became the focal point of the offense. Her palms were declared unclean. The skin that touched the ledger was deemed unworthy of remaining on her body. Some servants tried to petition mercy on her behalf, but humility from the lower class only fueled Lady Marianne's righteousness. "Compassion dulls discipline," she announced. "We will not dull it." Thornwall's nobles prepared for the ritual as though preparing for a celebration. The courtyard was swept clean. Chairs were arranged. Wine was chilled. Guests were invited, other aristocrats fascinated by the estate's reputation for maintaining exceptional order. They believed witnessing a cleansing strengthened their own social authority. The servants, meanwhile, moved like shadows, silent, shaken, resigned. Some prayed. Others avoided meeting Elara's eyes, haunted by memories of their own punishments. They knew pain would be inflicted. They also knew the cruelest part. The pain had to be self-inflicted. Obedience, after all, was most effective when the victim delivered the wound. And Elara understood something no one spoke aloud. Thornwall did not punish mistakes. Thornwall punished autonomy, a servant who showed intelligence, confidence, or the faintest spark of resistance threatened the hierarchy more than any spilled ink ever could. The noble family needed not just to hurt her, they needed to break the idea of her. As the sun rose on the day of her punishment, the overseers prepared the table, the brine, the blade. Noble guests whispered excitedly about Lady Marianne's new demonstration of discipline. They expected a spectacle, a ritual, a cleansing. But they were wrong about one thing. They believed they were peeling away Elara's obedience. They didn't realize they were peeling away their own power. Because when the first cut was made, the ritual revealed its true nature, not discipline, but domination carved directly into flesh. The courtyard had never been so quiet. Even the wind seemed to hesitate as Elara was brought to the wooden table, at its center a table smoothed by years of use, its surface darkened by stains no amount of sanding could erase. The nobles settled into their seats as though awaiting a performance. Servants gathered at the edges, shoulders hunched, clinging to one another like reeds in a storm. Elara's wrists were seized and lowered into a basin of boiling brine. The heat tore a gasp from her throat. It felt as though the water reached past skin and into bone, unraveling every nerve. Around her, the overseers murmured their usual instruction. The flesh must soften before it is shed. Steam curled around her arms, carrying the metallic scent of salt and fear. When her hands were dragged from the basin, the skin glistened bright, swollen, trembling. Elara could barely flex her fingers. That was when they placed the blade into her palm. It was a thin sliver of steel, sharpened to surgical precision. She closed her hand around it, and the warmth of her skin fogged the metal. "Begin," the overseer ordered. Elara hesitated. Just a single heartbeat. But in Thornwall, hesitation was defiance. A guard slammed her hand against the table, fingers splayed. Pain shot up her arm. "If you do not peel," he hissed, "we will peel for you and you will lose the hand." The nobles leaned forward, wine glasses raised. Elara lowered her gaze, swallowed hard, and pressed the edge of the blade beneath the reddened top layer of her own skin. The first peel was a quiet agony, sharp, wet, electric. The skin lifted reluctantly, clinging to her as though it, too, begged for mercy. A thin line of blood rose beneath it. Beating like dew on morning grass, Elara's breath caught. The servants flinched in unison. But the nobles watched with fascination, whispering to one another as though discussing a piece of art. "That one is precise," a baron murmured. "She understands discipline," his wife replied. Elara gritted her teeth and continued. She peeled slowly, carefully, the blade sliding between layers that were never meant to be separated. Her vision blurred. Her jaw trembled. Tears spilled over her cheeks, dropping onto the exposed flesh and burning like acid. Halfway across her palm, her stomach twisted. The courtyard tilted. Her knees buckled. She stopped just for a moment. The overseer seized her wrist, slamming her hand flat again. Finish it. And I can't. He tightened his grip, squeezing the raw skin. Elara cried out, finish it or lose the whole arm. With a shuddering breath, she obeyed. She peeled until the entire top layer of her palm lay in a curled strip on the table like a discarded petal. The nobles applauded lightly, the kind of applause given to a performer who has met, but not exceeded, expectations. But Lady Marianne rose, her voice silk over steel. Her impurity is deeper than her palm. A murmur ran through the crowd. Elara froze, up the wrist. Marianne continued, until I am satisfied that her arrogance has been removed. Elara's throat tightened. Please, I've done what you asked. The lady raised a hand. Silence fell. Disobedience hides beneath the surface. Strip it. Guards pinned Elara's arm to the table. Her hand shook violently, the blade slipping. She adjusted her grip. Her breath came in ragged bursts. The brine-soaked skin along her wrist was swollen, blistered. Too tender to touch, yet she pressed the blade beneath it. Pain roared through her body like fire tearing through brush. Her vision flooded with white. She peeled slowly, the skin separating in trembling strips. Blood followed in thin trails, dripping onto the table, traced instantly by flies. Her legs gave out. She fell to her knees but was held upright by the overseer's hand on her shoulder. Do not fall, he growled. Falling is disrespect. Her world shrank to three sensations: the scrape of the blade, the burn of exposed flesh, the iron taste of her own breath. Nobles examined her with clinical curiosity. Look how clean the peel is. She has strong control. She will be better after this. Better. A word that melted dignity into obedience. Elara's strength faltered. Her fingers slipped. Blood dripped freely now, pooling on the floor. She whispered a prayer, not for deliverance, but for endurance, because stopping meant death. The overseer pressed her hand harder into the table. Finish it, he repeated, the phrase becoming a chant. Finish what you started. Her vision blurred again. She could not see the blade, only feel it. Her tears mingled with blood on her wrist. A metallic tang filled her mouth. Her heartbeat pounded against her exposed nerves, each pulse a fresh shock of agony. From the balcony, Lady Marianne tilted her head, studying the scene. Her spirit remained stubborn. She observed. Peel higher. Elara's breath broke. No, please, please. But she lifted the blade. She obeyed. The ritual demanded it. The house demanded it. Pain demanded it. The nobles applauded again, softer this time, impressed by the spectacle of a servant stripping her own skin because fear commanded her hand more strongly than instinct. Protected it. And as Elara peeled, one question echoed through her mind, a whisper drowned beneath pain. If obedience is carved from suffering, what remains when the suffering ends? But Thornwall's nobles forgot that wounds heal, and the skin they stole would grow back into something far more dangerous than fear. When Elara collapsed after the ritual, the nobles assumed her spirit had finally broken. They returned to their wine, their gossip, their pleasant cruelty. The overseers dragged her into the servants' quarters, leaving a faint trail of blood on the stone floor, just another stain to be scrubbed away before dawn. But pain is a strange teacher. It wounds, yes, but it also carves truth into memory. And in Thornwall, every servant carried their memories like hidden weapons. That night, as Elara lay shaking on her cot, other servants gathered around her, silent, reverent, afraid. They unwrapped her bandages with trembling fingers, revealing the raw flesh beneath. Her peeled wrists glowed red in the candlelight, swollen and trembling with every breath. They expected to see defeat in her eyes. Instead, they found something far more dangerous: clarity. They cannot take more than we give. Elara whispered, voice frayed but steady. It was not rebellion. Not yet. It was recognition of truth. Thornwall had tried to bury beneath centuries of ritualized pain. Servants were taught to fear their wounds. But now, Elara saw the truth. Wounds were proof that they were still alive. Proof that the nobles had not finished what they intended to destroy. Word of her endurance spread through the quarters like a quiet fire. Servants who had been broken years before lifted their sleeves to reveal their own scars, faded strips, jagged patches, thin lines where skin had grown back paler than before. They compared them like soldiers comparing battle marks. For the first time, they realized their suffering matched, their scars aligned. Their pain formed patterns the nobles had never intended them to see. Over the weeks that followed, Thornwall faltered under its own arrogance. Famine crept through the countryside, thinning the livestock and blackening the crops. The nobles clung tighter to their luxuries, holding feasts while their servants starved. But hunger does what cruelty cannot. It equalizes fear. When people have nothing left to lose, obedience becomes optional. It started quietly. A chambermaid refused to kneel. A stable boy ignored an order. A kitchen servant looked Lady Marianne in the eyes for the first time in years. Small acts of defiance so small the nobles dismissed them as fatigue or incompetence. But among the servants, these tremors felt like thunder. Elara became the center of it all, not by shouting, but by standing. She walked slowly at first, her healing arm wrapped carefully. But each day she moved with a little more strength. Servants touched the bandages on her wrist like a relic, as though her pain were holy. Her peeled skin had not weakened her. It had transformed her. One night, when the famine finally reached Thornwall itself, and the nobles could no longer pretend the world beyond their walls existed, the servants gathered in the courtyard. They came in silence, carrying nothing but their scars. When Lady Marianne appeared on the balcony, demanding submission, no one knelt, no one bowed, no one peeled. "Your obedience is required," she declared. Elara stepped forward, raising her bare wrist. The new skin still tender, still pink, still alive. "Our obedience was carved from our bodies," she said softly, and it grew back. The nobles shouted. The overseers threatened. But for the first time in Thornwall's history, the servants did not move. They stood like stone pillars, unbending, unblinking, unbroken. The ritual that was meant to tame them had instead united them. Pain had bound them more tightly than fear ever could. Within days, the household collapsed under its own weight. Nobles fled. Overseers vanished. The Thornwall name dissolved into dust and rumor. The servants remained not as property, but as survivors. Centuries later, archaeologists excavating the manor uncovered ledgers detailing the cleansing rituals. Their pages stiff with dried salt, they found blood-darkened tables, rusted blades etched with family crests, and shallow basins stained by countless boilings. Some skeletons bore marks of healed layers, evidence of skin removed and grown anew. Historians debated whether the ritual had been widespread or isolated, but the remains told the truth. Skin had been peeled, pain had been weaponized, and obedience had been extracted through the most intimate cruelty imaginable. Yet what lingered longest was not the brutality, it was the quiet rebellion that ended it. The nobles believed they were stripping away disobedience. They didn't realize they were stripping away fear. And in the ruins of Thornwall, beneath collapsed stone and rotting beams, the wooden tables still stand smooth on the surface. But beneath the grain, forever marked by the memory of the hands that suffered, endured, and finally refused.